Have you ever looked at your family tree? Not just the names, the dates, but the actual stories,
Hmm.
the patterns that just seem to echo down through the years. Maybe it's something small, like, I don't know, everyone in your family gets lost easily, that kind of thing.
Right.
Or maybe it's something much, much heavier, something like broken trust. Like seeing that painful shadow of unfaithfulness showing up, generation after generation.
Yeah, that's tough to see.
Seeing that, maybe even living through the aftermath of it when you were growing up, it can stir up this really powerful fear, can it?
Absolutely.
A fear that makes you wonder, is that pattern? Is it written into my story too? Am I like doomed to repeat it just because it was part of my family history?
hmm It's a really unsettling question.
It is. It touches on fear, identity, the very foundation of your own marriage. And it's exactly the kind of complex, really vital question we need to explore, honestly.
It is, and it's a question that really comes from observation, doesn't it? You see the reality, maybe infidelity causing real pain, real division in the lives of people you love, people you're connected to, by blood and history.
Yeah.
And it's only natural, almost unavoidable to look at yourself and wonder if that same vulnerability, that same potential for causing or experiencing that kind of harm, well, if it exists in you just because you share that family line, feels, yeah, uncomfortably close to home.
And that brings us right to where we want to start today. You're welcome to our engaging conversation segment on Healthy Relationship Plug.
Glad to be here.
Our entire conversation today is focused on tackling this really challenging idea. Can these patterns of unfaithfulness you might have seen in your family history actually influence your own marriage? And maybe more importantly, if they can, does that mean you're destined to repeat them?
Big questions.
Huge. We want to explore the factors at play, what might feel like it's passed down, and then, really crucially, shine a bright light on the powerful truth, that faithfulness. Well, it's not some inherited trait you either got or didn't get.
Right. It's not like blue eyes.
Exactly. It's a chosen path, a path you absolutely can walk. You can build it, strengthen it, especially with God's help and guidance. Our goal isn't to, dwell on the past or scare anyone,
No, definitely not.
but to help you understand the dynamics involved so you can build an even stronger, more resilient marriage, intentionally choosing a different legacy, perhaps, than what you might have witnessed growing up. We promise to get into this with clear, relatable insights and grounded in real hope.
Because look, until you understand what might be influencing you and how it operates, it's really difficult to stand against it effectively. It can feel like you're, battling a ghost from the past or something.
Yeah, like fighting shadows.
Exactly. We want to help make that influence visible, look at its nature, and then equip you with the practical, faith-filled ways to actively build a future of faithfulness.
Yeah.
Deliberately choosing your own story, rather than just passively living out someone else's script.
Okay, so I think the most immediate kind of gut level question for anyone who's seen this pattern is, well, is it in the blood? Is unfaithfulness something you can like biologically inherit? Could I have a cheating gene that my parent or grandparent passed down, making me just naturally more likely to struggle with this?
That really is the core fear, isn't it? That it's somehow hardwired into your very being.
Yeah.
But let's be completely clear right from the start. Based on everything we understand about human behavior, about genetics, the answer is a resounding absolute NO.
Okay, good to hear that up front.
It really is. There's no scientific evidence, zero genetic markers, no specific cheating gene that gets passed down through your DNA. Your biological makeup does not determine whether you will be faithful or unfaithful in your marriage. That's a really, really critical point to anchor ourselves in.
So it's not like inheriting, say, a tendency for migraines or being predisposed to certain physical conditions. You don't get a little packet of instructions in your cells that says, oh, and by the way, you'll probably struggle with fidelity.
Not at all. Not even close. The analogy I find kind of helpful is thinking about inheriting a recipe versus inheriting a physical trait.
Okay, like what?
Well, let's say your grandmother had this amazing secret family recipe for, I don't know, chocolate chip cookies.
Sounds good.
Right. That recipe exists. It's been used in your family. You probably saw her make the cookies. Maybe you even helped. That recipe can absolutely be passed down through generations. Maybe it's written in an old cookbook. Maybe it was just shared verbally. But you have a choice. You can decide, yep, I'm going to use that recipe and make those cookies. Or you can decide, nope, never baking a single cookie in my life.
Right. I choose whether or not to follow the instructions.
Exactly. Now, your height, on the other hand,
Yeah.
that's largely determined by your genetics. You don't really get to choose whether you're going to be 6 feet tall or 5 feet tall. That's primarily decided by the genes you inherited.
Can't argue with that.
So infidelity falls squarely into the recipe category. It's something that might be present in the family system. You might have been exposed to it. You might have seen it made, so to speak. But choosing to follow that recipe, choosing to engage in that behavior, that is a choice. It is not a biological inevitability encoded in your DNA like your height or your eye color.
That analogy really helps clarify things. It shifts it, like you said, from being some kind of biological destiny to a behavioral choice.
That's the core distinction.
But then, if it's not in the genes, why does it feel so powerful sometimes? Why, when people see this pattern in their family, do they get that horrible, sinking feeling like it could be inevitable for them? Where does that feeling come from?
That feeling. It comes from witnessing the pattern itself. It comes from growing up in an environment where unfaithfulness was, in some way, shape, or form, just part of the landscape.
It's out of the scenery almost.
Yeah, kind of like living in a particular climate,
Yeah.
You don't inherit the climate biologically, obviously, but the climate you grow up in absolutely shapes your experiences, your expectations, even, the clothes you wear, the activities you do.
Makes sense.
So when you see parents, aunts, uncles, maybe even grandparents involved in unfaithfulness, it creates a powerful imprint. You see the behavior, you see the choices being made, and even if it caused immense pain, even if you hated it, its mere presence can subtly start to normalize it. Well, you might start to think, consciously or subconsciously, is this just how things are? Is this what relationships look like in my family? It plants a seed of expectation, even if it's a negative one.
So it's not about inheriting a gene, but maybe inheriting a script, or just the environment where that behavior existed and was maybe tolerated.
Exactly. It's about the legacy of patterns, attitudes, and crucially, even the silences that get passed down through generations. These things create a context, an atmosphere, where infidelity can start to seem less like a shocking, unthinkable betrayal and more like a familiar, maybe even expected part of the family story.
Okay, so that leads us right into the next crucial question then. If the whole cheating gene idea is a myth, what is actually being transmitted? What's being passed down through these generations that makes this pattern seem so persistent, so visible, and raises this deeply uncomfortable question for people?
Right. This is where we really move beyond biology and get into the territory of learned behavior, emotional inheritance, and belief systems. What's passed down are not genes, but patterns of behavior, and maybe even more powerfully, the attitudes and beliefs that surround those behaviors.
Can you give me an example of how that works? Like, how does a pattern of behavior get passed down if it's not genetic? It's not like someone sits you down and teaches you, right?
No, rarely is it that explicit. Think about it like this. Kids are incredibly observant. They're like little sponges soaking everything up.
For sure.
So even if unfaithfulness is hidden, maybe secretive, children often pick up on the tension, the unexplained absences, the hushed phone calls late at night, the emotional distance they feel between their parents, the sudden arguments that seem to come out of nowhere, followed by this heavy, strained silence.
They feel the atmosphere change.
They absolutely do. They might overhear snippets of conversations they don't fully understand. They might see evidence of secrets, even if they can't name them. They definitely feel the instability in the home. They're not told explicitly, hey, this is how you conduct an affair, but they witness the effects and the actions surrounding it. And when they see this repeatedly, maybe with different family members over time, it starts to shape their subconscious understanding of what relationships are and how people in relationships behave. Even if that understanding is deeply flawed, deeply painful, it creates a blueprint, you could say, even if it's a broken one, for how relationships work.
So it's like they learn by osmosis, just by being immersed in that environment.
Exactly. And often that environment isn't just saturated with the behavior itself, but also with the justifications of the beliefs that go along with it. And this is where it gets really damaging. Because people start to internalize the narrative, the story that exists around the unfaithfulness they witnessed. They might hear phrases growing up that subtly, or sometimes not so subtly, actually normalize the behavior.
Oh, wow. Like, what kind of phrases are we talking about?
Well, we often see these really damaging beliefs just echoing down through generations. They act like this toxic inheritance of mindset, You might hear things like, honey, look, all men cheat eventually. Just make sure he's a good provider and he always comes home.
Nah, that's awful.
It is. Or maybe, look, as long as she's back by morning and she's discreet about it, It's not that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things.
Minimizing it completely.
Totally. Or even the more casual ones that just chip away at the foundation of commitment, like, little fun on the side, never hurt anyone. Or, well, you can love your wife and still have, needs that aren't being met at home.
Wow. Just hearing those examples, hearing those kinds of statements growing up would completely warp your perception of fidelity, wouldn't it? It would make it seem like an impossible standard, or maybe something people only pretend to uphold.
Precisely. These phrases, these underlying beliefs, they essentially act as permission slips.
Yeah.
Or justifications for the behavior. They lower the perceived importance of faithfulness, and at the same time, they raise the perceived inevitability of unfaithfulness. They whisper, this is normal. This is unavoidable. Maybe it's even acceptable under certain circumstances. So, you see, you're not inheriting a gene for cheating, but you are potentially inheriting a perspective on marriage and fidelity that makes the path to unfaithfulness seem, well, less obstructed,
Right.
less morally significant, or maybe even just realistic,
Right.
based on what you were taught, directly or indirectly.
And you mentioned silences, too, earlier. How does what isn't said play into this whole legacy?
Oh, the silence is incredibly potent. Often, unfaithfulness becomes the giant elephant in the room. Everybody knows it's there, maybe suspects it, maybe even has proof. But nobody is allowed to talk about it honestly.
The family secret.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that silence, it's deafening. It communicates several powerful, really damaging messages. It says, this is something deeply shameful, so we must hide it. Or it says, this is something so painful or maybe so unavoidable that we just have to tolerate it. Or,
Yeah.
this is a secret burden you have to carry all alone.
That sounds incredibly isolating.
It is. And the lack of open, healthy conversations about the sanctity of marriage vows, about the real impact of betrayal, about how to set healthy boundaries, about seeking help and healing, that silence prevents processing. It prevents healing. And it allows the pattern to just keep going, underground, unchallenged. The lessons are learned not just from the actions you see and the words you hear, but also from the heavy, unspoken truths.
So it's this combination, then. The patterns of behavior people witness, the normalizing beliefs and excuses they hear, and these weighty silences that cover it all up. They all combine to create this generational influence.
Yes.
It's really a legacy of distorted perspectives and unaddressed brokenness, not something written into your genetic code.
Exactly that. It's mindsets, learned patterns, emotional responses. Those are the things that get passed down and create challenges. It's not biological destiny.
Okay, so we've talked about the behavioral patterns, the beliefs, the silences, but there feels like there's an even deeper layer here, often maybe more painful, the emotional impact, right? Growing up in that kind of environment.
Absolutely. You're right. Beyond the observable patterns, beyond the absorbed beliefs, there is this profound emotional legacy. And often it manifests as trauma.
Trauma, that's a strong word.
It is. And it's appropriate here. Growing up in a home where unfaithfulness caused significant pain, instability, wrecked peace, broken trust. That can be deeply traumatic for a child. Imagine the constant stress, maybe the fear of abandonment, the confusion, the pain of watching a parent suffer, or maybe watching a parent inflict suffering. These experiences leave lasting emotional scars.
And how do those scars, that emotional inheritance, how does it tend to show up later in life, specifically thinking about a person's own marriage?
Yeah, the impact can be really complex and sometimes quite counterintuitive. One common way it shows up is a deep-seated fear of intimacy and commitment.
Why is that?
Well, think about it. If the very foundation of your understanding of close relationships learned in your childhood home involves betrayal, pain, instability, you might unconsciously develop this core belief that true closeness is actually dangerous.
So you protect yourself.
Exactly. So you might build walls around your heart. You might keep people, even your spouse, at an emotional distance. You might struggle to fully trust, always kind of bracing yourself for the disappointment or the betrayal you just expect is coming. It makes forming and maintaining a healthy, vulnerable marriage incredibly difficult.
That makes perfect sense. You learn to protect yourself based on those earliest, most formative experiences.
Right. And another way it can manifest, one that can be particularly confusing for the person experiencing it and their partner, is self-sabotage.
Self-sabotage. How does that work?
Someone might find themselves, often without even realizing why, doing things that undermine their own healthy marriage, things that push their partner away or create conflict.
But why would they do that if they want the marriage to work?
Because the expectation of betrayal, the expectation of failure is so strong, so deeply ingrained from their past that it feels almost inevitable. So subconsciously, they might be trying to make the anticipated outcome happen, maybe on their own terms, perhaps to get it over with,
Hmm.
or maybe because the waiting and the constant dread feel even worse than the event itself.
Wow.
It's a tragic, really misguided attempt to regain some sense of control over a narrative that feels predetermined. Like, if I expect it to fail anyway, maybe I can control how it fails.
That sounds incredibly painful. It's like they're almost compelled to recreate the very thing they fear the most.
It can feel that way, absolutely.
Mhm.
And this brings us to a really surprising, sometimes deeply unsettling point that comes up when exploring these patterns. In some cases, individuals who are absolutely terrified of being cheated on might actually be the ones who cheat first.
Wait, that seems completely upside down. If you're terrified of being hurt like that, why on earth would you inflict that same hurt on someone else?
It doesn't seem logical on the surface, does it? It seems contradictory. But when you look at it through the lens of deep-seated fear and unhealed trauma, it can actually function as this perverse, twisted defense mechanism.
Wow.
If you are utterly convinced deep down that you will eventually be betrayed and abandoned, then cheating first is this desperate, broken attempt to sort of inoculate yourself against that anticipated pain.
Like getting the first punch in.
Kind of.
Yeah.
It shifts the power dynamic, at least in your own perception.
Yeah.
You are no longer the potential victim, just waiting helplessly for the blow to fall. You become the one making the choice, the one initiating the hurt. It's a way of saying, maybe unconsciously, you can't hurt me like that because, look, I've already hurt you.
That's really complex.
It is. It's not usually born out of strength or a malicious desire to harm. More often, it comes from a place of profound vulnerability, and this really twisted form of self-protection against a wound you feel is inevitably coming your way. It's heartbreakingly complex, and it really speaks volumes about the deep emotional damage that the pattern of unfaithfulness can leave behind.
So just to be clear, these are not biological transmissions we're talking about. These are emotional and behavioral echoes of past pain, unaddressed trauma, creating vulnerabilities and sometimes leading to these really unexpected, harmful coping mechanisms in future relationships.
Exactly. It's the weight of experience shaping the emotional landscape. It's learned responses, coping mechanisms, or maybe non-coping mechanisms. It's not something in your genetic predisposition.
Okay, this is heavy stuff for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But it leads us, I think, to a really crucial point of hope, especially looking at this from a Christian perspective. If these patterns, these beliefs silences trauma responses, if they get passed down and sometimes cause what feels like this generational struggle, where does faith come into play? We hear the term generational sin sometimes. What does that actually mean in this context? And how does it relate to something called generational healing?
Yes, this is where the spiritual dimension becomes absolutely vital. The Bible does speak, in certain passages, about the consequences of sin extending beyond the individual, sometimes impacting future generations. Exodus 20 is a place people often point to.
Right.
Now, when we talk about generational sin in this specific context, thinking about patterns of unfaithfulness, it's crucial, really crucial, to be very precise about what it does not mean.
Okay, what doesn't it mean?
It does not mean you are spiritually cursed. It does not mean you are inherently guilty before God for your ancestors' sins. And it absolutely does not mean you are divinely predestined to cheat just because someone in your family tree did.
That would seem to contradict God's grace, wouldn't it?
Completely. It would contradict core truths about God's justice, His grace, and the personal responsibility each and every individual has before Him. Ezekiel 18 makes that really clear. The soul who sins is the one who will die.
Okay, so it's not like God is punishing me for my parents' choices or I'm somehow preloaded with their sin.
Precisely. A much better way to understand it, in line with the wisdom we're exploring here, is that the consequences and the patterns of sin create significant challenges for the subsequent generations. Think about the environment shaped by a parent's or grandparents' unfaithfulness, the emotional turmoil, the broken trust, the unhealthy communication models, the normalization of wrong behavior, the unresolved trauma we just talked about.
Yeah, that's
Those become the obstacles. Those become the difficult realities that the children then have to navigate as adults in their own lives and relationships. The sin itself isn't passed down as personal guilt, but the effects of the sin, the tendency to repeat the pattern, the woundedness left in the family system, those create a challenging inheritance.
So it's the legacy of a broken family system that poses the challenge.
Exactly. It's what one generation didn't confront, didn't heal from, or maybe just tolerated, that the next generation might find themselves having to actively battle within their own hearts and relationships. It's the challenging environment, not some kind of spiritual curse of inevitability.
Okay, that distinction is huge. Generational sin is about the lingering effects and the patterns creating a difficult environment. not a spiritual destiny to repeat the actual sin.
Yes, that distinction is absolutely everything. And understanding that opens the door wide to the equally powerful, incredibly life-giving truth. Generational healing is absolutely real, and it is profoundly possible through Jesus Christ.
That's the hope.
That is the hope. You are not defined by the dysfunction or the brokenness of the generations that came before you. Your primary identity is found in Christ, and His power is infinitely greater than any negative pattern or trauma you've inherited or experienced. The story of your family history, it's just that. It's history. It does not have the final say over the story you are writing now with God and with your spouse. God's capacity to heal, to restore, to transform that is the ultimate reality.
That is a message of incredible hope. And even with that hope, the confusion can still linger, right? Someone might think, okay, I get it's not destiny, but I really love my spouse. Where would this temptation even come from then? Why would I even think about it? We touched on the trauma and the patterns, but you also mentioned earlier that unfaithfulness can grow out of internal issues.
Yes, absolutely. The wisdom we're drawing from really highlights that while those external influences and past wounds definitely create vulnerability, the actual choice to be unfaithful often springs from unaddressed issues within the individual themselves. It's not always, or even usually, a reflection of a lack of love for the spouse in that specific moment. Often it's much more a reflection of some internal brokenness that hasn't been properly dealt with.
What kind of internal brokenness are we talking about? What are the common roots?
The insights we're considering point to several key roots that can create fertile ground for infidelity. Emotional immaturity is a really big one.
What does that look like?
It looks like the inability to handle difficult emotions in a healthy way, or navigate conflict constructively, or delay gratification, or even just tolerate boredom or discomfort within the marriage without seeking an external escape. If you lack the internal resources, the maturity to process pain, frustration, or unmet needs in a healthy way, you might be much more susceptible to seeking external harmful ways to cope or feel better.
Okay, emotional immaturity. What else?
Selfishness is another primary root. Just to focus on one's own desires, needs, and gratification above the sacred covenant made with a spouse and before God. When self-interest consistently trumps commitment and empathy, well, the path to infidelity becomes much smoother, doesn't it?
Sadly, yes.
Fear, as we discussed in the context of trauma, is also a powerful internal driver. Fear of inadequacy, maybe? Fear of being truly seen and known, flaws and all, and then being rejected. Fear of missing out on something. Fear of just not being enough.
So fear drives people away from connection.
It can, paradoxically. And very often, unfaithfulness grows out of deep-rooted, unaddressed pain, wounds from childhood maybe, past hurts in other relationships, deep insecurity. Cheating can become this really misguided attempt to numb that pain or escape from it, or maybe just feel alive for a moment or prove something to oneself. It's often a symptom, you see, of an underlying internal struggle that desperately needs healing.
So the past might create the challenging terrain, the vulnerability. But it's the internal state of the individual, the unaddressed stuff inside, that really determines whether they are vulnerable to actually falling into those old patterns or temptations.
Precisely. And this is exactly why taking responsibility for your own healing and growth is absolutely paramount.
Yeah.
Look, the painful environment you might have grown up in, the trauma you might have experienced, none of that was your fault. You didn't choose that.
Right.
But the responsibility for engaging in your own healing journey, for addressing those internal vulnerabilities we just talked about, for actively choosing a different path day by day, and for intentionally building a faithful marriage, that responsibility is yours. Before God and before your spouse. It requires intentionality, it requires courage, and it requires a flat-out refusal to let your past define your future.
That shift from feeling like a victim of your past to taking empowered responsibility for your present and future, that feels crucial. So how do you actually do that? How do you actively break a cycle that feels so deeply tied to your history, maybe even to your identity? Where do you even start? It can feel overwhelming.
It can feel overwhelming, but it's not impossible. This is the action phase, the practical steps, and the wisdom we're considering lays out a pretty clear path forward.
Okay, walk me through it. What's step one?
Step one is absolutely fundamental. You have to call it what it is. Meaning, don't minimize unfaithfulness. Don't excuse it away as, oh, it was just a mistake, or it was just a moment of weakness. Don't perpetuate those damaging lies like, well, that's just how men are, or that's just what happens when you've been married a long time. And certainly, please, don't romanticize or normalize it by calling it some kind of family tradition.
Right. No excuses.
No excuses. The perspective we're leaning into here suggests calling it brokenness.
Brokenness.
Hmm.
Why that specific word?
Because it accurately describes the state of the individual and the state of the relationship when fidelity is violated. It acknowledges that this isn't just some simple slip-up. It stems from deeper issues, from wounds, from a lack of wholeness or health within. Labeling it as brokenness demands a much more serious response, doesn't it? It requires repair, mending, healing, not just a casual dismissal or a cover-up.
Yeah, using the word brokenness definitely makes it sound more serious. More like something that needs intentional fixing. Like you said, like a broken bone maybe. You wouldn't just ignore that.
Exactly. It shifts the whole perspective from making excuses to acknowledging deep damage that needs attention. Now, step 2 builds directly on this, especially when you're thinking about your family history. Choose better, don't excuse.
What does that mean practically?
It means you can absolutely love your family members who struggled with unfaithfulness.
Me.
You can have compassion for their pain or their flaws. You can pray for them. But, and this is a huge act, but you absolutely do not have to validate their choices. You don't have to adopt their patterns. And you certainly shouldn't use their history as an excuse for your own potential behavior or struggles.
Okay.
Loving someone does not mean endorsing their brokenness or feeling obligated to replicate it in your own life. Your primary loyalty, your covenant loyalty, is to your marriage vows, to your spouse, and to your relationship with God. You consciously choose to build something different, something healthier.
So it's like you honor the relationship you have with your family, maybe your parents or whoever, but you establish really clear boundaries around what you will and will not accept or replicate in your own marriage.
Precisely. It's distinguishing love from endorsement. It's honoring people without honoring their harmful patterns. Now, step 3, and this is foundational for Christian couples, let God deal with the roots.
The roots we talked about earlier, the pain, fear, selfishness.
Exactly. As we discussed, unfaithfulness often grows out of those deep internal issues. And honestly, those aren't things you can just willpower your way out of. You need divine intervention. And often, you need wise guidance.
So what does letting God deal with the roots involve?
This step involves engaging in spiritual disciplines intentionally, praying consistently, asking God for strength, for healing from past wounds, for conviction of sin, for transformation of your desires and thought patterns. Fasting is also mentioned as a powerful way to deny the desires of the flesh, to discipline yourself, and to strengthen your reliance on the Spirit of God instead of your own coping mechanisms.
Okay, prayer and fasting. What else?
And very, very importantly, it involves seeking wise counsel. Specifically, the recommendation is seeking help from a Christian counselor.
Why is Christian counseling highlighted as so important here, as opposed to maybe secular therapy?
That's a great question. A good, skilled Christian counselor is trained not only in psychological principles, but also integrates a biblical worldview. They can help you identify and process those deep roots, the trauma from your past, the ingrained beliefs you inherited, the fears, the unaddressed pain in a way that is both psychologically sound and spiritually grounded.
Okay.
They can help you go deep, as they say, into those really difficult areas in a safe, structured, and faith-affirming environment. They help bring those hidden things into the light so that God's healing power, through His Spirit and His Word, can actually penetrate them. It's about combining spiritual reliance with practical wisdom and professional expertise.
So it's not bypassing God, but partnering with Him through skilled help.
Exactly. It's recognizing that while God can certainly heal instantaneously, He very often works through means. And skilled faith-based therapy can be a powerful means of grace for deep emotional, psychological, and spiritual healing. It helps you understand why certain patterns might feel familiar or tempting, and it equips you with godly, healthy ways to respond differently.
So it's engaging in the battle against these patterns, not just on the surface level, but really getting down to the root level with God's help and often with expert guidance.
Exactly. It's intentional, directed healing. Okay, step 4 is about guarding your heart and your habits. This is the practical day-in, day-out vigilance that's required.
What does that look like?
It means you need to become acutely aware of what triggers you, what makes you vulnerable. Are there specific emotional states like maybe feeling lonely or angry or bored or stressed out that tend to lead your thoughts down a dangerous path? Are there specific situations like maybe traveling alone for work or spending time with certain people or being in certain environments that make you feel tempted or stir up old ways of thinking or coping? You need to identify those personal triggers.
Know yourself, basically.
Know yourself, know your weaknesses, and also, critically, watch your associations. The people you surround yourself with matter immensely. Proverbs talks about this a lot. Are your closest friends people who genuinely value and uphold faithfulness in marriage? Or are they people who maybe normalize or joke about infidelity, complain constantly and bitterly about their spouses,
Huh.
or perhaps put you in tempting or compromising situations?
Oof, that's a challenging one.
It is, but it's vital. Your company shapes your perspective and influences your vulnerability. So be intentional about who you let speak into your life, especially regarding marriage.
So it's about self-awareness and then actively building healthy boundaries around your time, your influences, your relationship.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's actively protecting the ground of your heart and mind.
Yeah.
And then the fifth step, and this one requires significant maturity and vulnerability. It's being honest with your partner.
Honest about what specifically?
Honest about this journey you're on. As you uncover and start working through these generational patterns, these internal issues, these vulnerabilities, share what you are learning with your spouse. Talk about the struggles you face, maybe the fears that come up, the specific vulnerabilities you recognize stemming from your past.
That sounds terrifying.
It can be. It takes real courage. But this isn't about blaming your spouse or making them responsible for your healing. Not at all. It's about bringing your authentic self, your struggles included, into the safety and the strength of your marriage covenant.
How does that help?
It builds incredible trust because you're choosing transparency over hiding. You're letting them see your internal landscape. It allows your spouse to understand you better, to pray for you more specifically, and crucially, to partner with you in actively guarding your marriage together. It transforms what could be a hidden, isolating personal battle into a shared mission for faithfulness.
Wow. That vulnerability piece, it sounds incredibly difficult, but also incredibly bonding if you can do it.
It really is. It requires courage, but it absolutely cements the bond. It strengthens the team aspect of your marriage like almost nothing else. And when you bring all these steps together, calling brokenness what it is, choosing not to excuse past patterns, actively seeking God for that root-level healing through prayer, fasting, and wise counsel, diligently guarding your heart and your habits, and practicing that radical, vulnerable honesty with your spouse.
Yeah.
You are actively choosing a different story.
Yeah.
You are drawing a line in the sand and saying, the buck stops here, this pattern does not continue with me. You are declaring that you are not bound by the dysfunction of the past. The choices of your parents or grandparents do not have to be your choices. You can be the one in your family line to break the cycle of unfaithfulness.
That's powerful.
It is. You don't have to repeat that painful narrative. You can choose faithfulness intentionally, day by day, relying completely on God's indispensable grace and strength, and building a new, healthy, faithful legacy for your own family. Your history is definitely a part of you. It shapes you, but it absolutely does not have to dictate your destiny.
That is such a powerful, truly empowering message. It takes what can feel like this heavy, almost predetermined burden, and it places the power of choice and the reality of God's healing hand squarely in your present and your future.
It shifts the focus entirely, doesn't it? It acknowledges the reality of the challenges that might have been passed down, yes, but it emphasizes the even greater, more powerful reality of the resources available through Christ to overcome those challenges and build something new, something strong, something faithful.
Okay, so just to kind of bring together the main threads of what we've talked about today, unfaithfulness isn't some trait you inherit biologically, like your eye color or your height. That's a myth.
Right, not genetic.
Instead, what can be passed down are things like the environmental patterns, those damaging beliefs and excuses that normalize it, the impact of those heavy silences, and maybe most profoundly, the emotional wounds or the trauma caused by infidelity in previous generations.
Exactly, the learned stuff, the emotional stuff.
And while that concept of generational sin, it highlights the real challenges and the difficult terrain created by past sin in a family, the profound truth of generational healing through Christ offers the power to break free.
That's the core message of hope.
But breaking the cycle, it isn't automatic, is it? It's an active choice. It involves consciously labeling unfaithfulness as the brokenness it truly is. Choosing deliberately not to excuse or repeat those past behaviors, no matter how familiar they feel. Allowing God to address the underlying roots through things like prayer, maybe fasting, and seeking wise Christian counseling.
Getting help is key.
Yeah. And then actively guarding your heart and your habits, identifying your personal triggers, choosing healthy associations, and finally, building trust through that open, vulnerable honesty with your spouse about your journey. Faithfulness isn't just a passive state you achieve, it's a dynamic choice, isn't it? A daily commitment and a path you walk intentionally, deeply reliant on God's strength, and really in partnership with your spouse.
It really is a journey that requires both vigilance and a lot of grace for yourself and for your partner. But it absolutely is a journey filled with hope, leading towards a marriage that's characterized by deep trust, security, and enduring faithfulness, regardless of the patterns that might have come before you.
So, as you listening, think about the patterns you've maybe witnessed in your own family history. The good ones, the ones you cherish and want to carry forward, and maybe some of the painful ones like we've talked about today. Here's a thought to leave you with. What is one concrete, intentional step you can take today to strengthen the foundation of faithfulness in your own marriage?
Hmm. Just one step.
It's just one. Maybe it's taking a quiet moment right now or later today to pray specifically about any fears or unhealthy mindsets you recognize as we were talking. Perhaps it's choosing to have a brave, maybe slightly uncomfortable conversation with your spouse later today, sharing something vulnerable about how your past history impacts you, and reinforcing your shared commitment to building a faithful future together. Or maybe it's simpler. Maybe it's identifying just one specific habit or association that you know makes you vulnerable and making a conscious decision to guard against it starting right now. Don't let the echoes of the past control your present or dictate your future. Choose faithfulness. Take that one intentional step today.
And please, if anything we've discussed today has resonated really deeply with you, maybe stirring up some old pain or highlighting areas where you know you need to explore further, please know that you absolutely do not have to navigate this alone. Resources like WISE, faith-based Christian counseling, are invaluable for this kind of work. There are also wonderful biblical studies out there on covenant, on marriage, on healing that can provide deeper understanding and spiritual strength. Don't hesitate to seek out that support. You are not defined by the brokenness of the past, and you truly have the power in Christ to build a new, faithful legacy.
Absolutely well said. We truly hope this conversation has been insightful for you, maybe challenging, but ultimately empowering. Take these points to heart, maybe talk them over with your spouse, and take those courageous steps towards building the strong, faithful, Christ-centered marriage that God intends for you. Thank you so much for joining us for this engaging conversation. We really look forward to having you join us again next time for more insights on building healthy relationships.